Hi, welcome to lesson 2 of the fiction and poetry section. So today, obviously, we've already talked about character. What's most important to talk about next is the exposition. Now, the exposition gives us all of that really important background information. In this section, we talked about Bram Stoker's Dracula, personal favorite, and of course, again, Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. Let's start with Huck Finn for a second. So, in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, obviously we're talking about Tom Sawyer's best friend, right? So, in the very beginning of the book, you'll notice the opening page says that it's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. It tells you when it happens and tells you who we're talking about. It actually says that this is Tom Sawyer's friend. Now, this is relying a lot on the reader for having some background information. A lot of stories don't do this. If you're reading a series, let's say you're reading Harry Potter or you're reading Lord of the Rings or anything else that is in a series, the second and third books and so on and so forth obviously assume that you have read the previous novels. Okay, this makes perfect sense. So when we start out with Huckleberry Finn, we're assuming that you've read Tom Sawyer. Okay, so that being said, this is the exposition. The exposition actually relies upon an entire separate work in order for you to know who we're talking about, what we're talking about. That being said, while we do rely on you to know all this information, the very first page does set it up for you. It says that it's a number of years ago. It says that it's Tom Sawyer's friend. It says that it's Huckleberry Finn. Okay? So, with that information, it's one page, it simply states it, and we're assuming that you know what's going on. Let's look at Bram Stoker's Dracula. Okay? In this situation, however, we rely upon the reader to actually glean the information themselves. So, we rely upon the reader to understand the characters, to know where they're coming from, to use the context clues, and this is extremely important. Relating this back to children's stories, again, we always start off with once upon a time. Now, when we say once upon a time, we're obviously not saying this happened in 1892, or we're not saying this happened 10 years ago. We're saying once upon a time because this is magical. This is someplace that is absolutely fantastic, and we don't know exactly when it happened, but there's magic and there are talking animals and all these wonderful things. So, if we're going to set a story like this, then obviously we have a little more room to play. We have more talking animals, like I said. We have more magic. We have more things than what a more today kind of novel is going to have. So let's look at other stories like The Clockwork Orange. We know when that takes place. We know about the characters. They're very human, while extremely crazy and a little difficult to relate to. They are more relatable than, let's say, a bear character. Okay, so the exposition is going to tell us the background a little bit. It's going to tell us who. It's going to tell us when. It's going to tell us where. Okay, let's take another story for example. Let's say that, again, we're reading an adult novel, The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby, we know exactly when and where that takes place as well. We don't really leave a whole lot up to the reader in The Great Gatsby to figure out the exposition on their own. That's all kind of framed for them. Okay, so keep in mind, the exposition is going to make it extremely relatable as well. I know we were talking about that with character. That's something that you want to keep in mind with your plot from the very beginning. While we do want to leave a little bit up to the reader to understand on their own, to kind of have to do a little bit of work in order to get through it, we don't want to make it impossible. Okay, let's take any work by Raymond Bradbury. Obviously, if you've read any of the pieces that take place in the future, if you've read any of the pieces such as Something Wicked This Way Comes, if you're going to read a piece like that, you know that this is childhood. You know when this is occurring. You know that this is occurring in kind of a small town or something along those lines. Again, extremely relatable. A lot of people live in small towns. We understand what it's like to be a young child, to be adventurous, and to be a little crazy. Now, let's go back to Bram Stoker's Dracula. This is, again, while it is a beautiful, beautiful piece of work, it is a little difficult to relate to some of the characters due to the situation. However, the characters remain extremely real. The exposition also informs us of who the characters are. We have an English lawyer. We have people going to England. We know why they are in England, especially Count Dracula. While it is a hoax, while he is lying about why he wants to go to Dracula, or I'm sorry, why he wants to go to England, we have an idea. We have a general idea of why he wants to go there. It's later on in the novel that we start noticing that there's something a little wrong with him. So, the exposition at the very beginning of the novel becomes incorrect. However, for our purposes and for the purposes of the reader and the writer, this is exactly what we wanted. We wanted the reader to believe a certain way. We wanted the reader to think Count Dracula is going to England because he wants to. So, we don't exactly want to open up the story saying, this is a great monster who's going to go to England and kill people and suck their blood and turn them into vampires. While absolutely wonderful later on in the story, it's going to give away far too much. So, not only is the exposition extremely important because we do need that background information. We need to know where we are. We need to know what time period this is going on in. Honestly, think about it. If you are reading Dracula and you find, if you're reading and you think that this happened in 2010, things are going to be a little bit different, especially later on when you're reading and you notice what they're wearing or how they're traveling. It doesn't really work very well. So the exposition also informs us of when to start thinking and why certain things make sense. Let's take the Headless Horseman for a moment here. Obviously, he's not driving around in a car. That'd be a little silly. While the Headless Horseman does open up by, having the title of a horseman, which is something that we don't really see that often anymore, this is not a race car driver. We're not having the headless race car driver. We're having the Headless Horseman. So we have to figure out what time exactly we are experiencing this. And the exposition gives us that, along with the title. So this is also extremely important. So when you're writing your exposition or when you're looking for the exposition in a novel, make sure that you're looking for that time period. Make sure you're looking at clothing. Make sure you are looking at the characters who come into play. Usually it's the main characters who are in the exposition. The less important characters may also come into play, but keep in mind we're not going to find out a whole lot about them, okay? So let's relate it this way. Let's say you're telling a story at a party and you need to obviously give an exposition. Now, if you look at your friends at the party and you say, oh my gosh, I was just at the movie theater and I saw Jim and I saw Carol and I saw Nancy. Let's say your friends don't know who those people are. It's not really important what their names are if they don't know who they are, right? So, in the exposition, we may give names like that. Or we might say, oh, I was just at the movies and I saw my friends. That's what's important. What's important is who they are in relation to the main character. Keep in mind, when you're telling a story about yourself, who is the main character? You. You are the main character in your story. So, you go to the movies and you see all these secondary characters, and that's who you're going to talk about in your story as well. They're not quite as important in the exposition. However, in your exposition, we found out that there's you. We found out that there are some other characters. We found out where this is going on, and most likely you're going to tell when you went to the movies as well. You might say last week, or when that new Tom Hanks movie came out. Okay? So, expositions. This is something that we use all the time. We talk like this every single day, especially when we're talking to our friends, especially when we want to set up a situation in which someone should be interested. Okay? So, exposition. Main character, where, when, and sometimes why.